I'm going to show two numbers on the screen, and these two numbers mean different things. So before you guys start guessing, the left number on the screen is the average number of code lines, or in other words, modifications on a Business Central add-on or an ISV solution, and etc. On the right side is the average number of hours that are required to move these types of solutions to AL. So basically on the left side is how many lines of code there are in CAL, or basically not in extensions yet. And on the right is the number of hours required to move these types of solutions. But these numbers of hours are quite relative, because if I select a different type of transition alternative, or basically a different scope, I can minimize the hours required to move a solution from CEL to AL. And this is what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about what alternatives do we have when moving a solution from CEL to AL, and how do we choose them wisely? Or in other words, what shortcuts can I take when I want to scope a CEL solution to be moved to extensions? So the agenda for today is what options do we have when moving from CEL to AL? What different target platforms do we have, and how do we make sure that we move to those platforms correctly? Then what CEL to AL limitations do we identify at One Click Factory, and how do we cope with them? Then what practices do we have when moving a CEL to AL solution? And then we're going to have a Q&A. So for the demos for today, I took one customer case. This is a real customer case, but with a completely different name on it. So I called it the Bicycle Company, because on the older Kronos company, I think the first item that you can sell is either a bicycle wheel or something like that. So the Bicycle Company sells bicycles and bicycle parts. It has some custom functionality to basically sell fully built bicycles, or maybe sell some parts with special categorizing and coloring. And they have asked us, maybe us at Monthly Factory, to move their solution from CEL to EL. So naturally, the first question would be, what options do I have when I want to move a solution from CEL to AL? And there are three options, and the first one is the least recommended option, and it's the modified base application. So basically, a modified base application means that I take the Microsoft application from the installer of Business Central, and I add the modifications directly on that application. So this is basically how we used to do it on CEL. We would open up any of the objects that are on Business Central, and then modify those objects directly. For example, I open up the item table, and then maybe add some code, add a different field, maybe even delete a field, and this is the modified base application. There are a number of reasons why this is not really recommended, but the main one is the upgrade process. So the upgrade process when upgrading a modified base application solution most of the time looks like this. So I take the solution, and then I need to know what changes have been made on that specific solution. So I take the standard objects on that solution, compare that solution with the standard objects, and then I'm gonna have the differences, or basically the code lines that have been added to that solution, or basically all the modifications that your customer or partner has added on that solution. Then I take those differences, those deltas, and then apply them line by line to the new version of Business Central. And lastly, I'm going to have a newer version of Business Central with those specific changes. And this may seem like a simple process, but this process is quite a tedious one, and you would need to do this for every time that you want to upgrade your solution to any newer version of Business Central. Even the CU updates are going to need this type of process. They're going to need comparing, identifying what modifications have been made, then move those modifications to the newer standard, and every time the cycle repeats itself. So, okay, so we have the modified base app. What is the second one, the second option? The second one is having a full extension. And having a full extension means that we don't modify the Microsoft base application, but we take that application and create uh, a completely separate application, which is only a bit dependent on the Microsoft application. And then we have two separate applications installed. And this is quite good if it's possible. For example, there are quite a lot of pros when having a full extension. The first one is that it's a lot easier to maintain than having a base application modification, because all of our code base that we have added is in one specific place. The second thing is that it's a lot easier to install. We can go to the extension management page on Business Central and then install that application directly when we are even on the page. The third thing is that if we have an extension that is compliant with the App Store's requirements, we are able to publish that extension on the Saas, on App Stores, and etc. So the cons of having a fully built extension is that when we are migrating from a CL-based solution to AL, it is not always fully possible because some modifications you cannot move directly as they are from CL to AL. Because it's not always fully possible to move them directly, you will need more time to re-implement those modifications so they would work on AL. And this is not just, it may take up it may take up 5 times more time that might be needed when moving to a base app. So, and so what other options do we have when transitioning? We have the third option, which is basically the best of both worlds, and it's called the hybrid solution. And the hybrid model has its pros and cons, but the hybrid model is basically a solution in which we have modifications in the base application, and we also have a separate extension with most of the changes made on that extension. And this model has its pros and cons, but let's look at them more quite in depth. So one of the pros is that almost or most of the modifications are moved into the separate application, and some of them are still left in the base application. So we have the base application with some modifications and a separate extension with the most of our functionality. The second thing is that we can move our solution to the extension maybe later, because maybe in the current version of Business Central, it's not possible to move a modification directly as it is on the base application. We can wait maybe half a year until Microsoft releases a newer version of Business Central, which allows us to move that modification directly into extension. Lastly, it can be done in parts, and this is quite a good thing because I can move most of the modifications now and then move the other half maybe later in the life cycle of my application. Last but not least is I can ask Microsoft for help. For example, if I see that I have some code that does not have any type of publisher next to it, I can ask Microsoft to add additional publishers to the base app, so I would be able to move the code quite directly from the place that which is standing on to the other. The main con of having a hybrid model that it's not recommended for ISV providers that need a solution right now, because if you have a modified base application in any way, if you have modified the base application in any way, it is not possible to publish that type of solution on App Stores, on the SaaS version of Business Central, and etc. So let's recap for a bit. So we have the modified base application, which is basically taking the Microsoft base application and then modifying it directly. We have the extension model in which we have a separate extension for our base application. And then we have the hybrid model, which is basically we have the base application with some modifications, and we have a separate application with our custom objects. So naturally, we have talked about the paradigms, but one of the questions might be, okay, so how many hours do I need to move my solution from to separate transition models? So the modified base application, if for the bicycle company, if I would want to move that solution to AL, it would take 100 hours to move that solution to the base app. To move my solution to a fully blown out extension, I would need 400 hours. This is 4 times more than a modified base app. But for a hybrid solution, it would take 260 hours. So basically in between those two. But remember, all of these models have their pros and cons. For example, the modified base application is very difficult to upgrade later in the life cycle. In the hybrid, we can move the modification later, but it's not possible to publish on app source. But with the extension model, we are future-proofing the solution in the cost of having a larger number of modifications that need to be implemented. So there are 3 models: modified base app, hybrid, and extension. So before we start talking of what kind of model do I take, we need to talk about target platforms. And currently there are 2 target platforms on Business Central. The first one is the one we all know and love, is the on-premise version of Business Central, which is basically the version of Business Central that we have installed locally, maybe our own infrastructure, maybe our own PCs, maybe we have chosen a specific cloud provider and installed the application there. But basically, Business Central on-premise means that we have full control over the infrastructure of Business Central. The second one is probably the most advertised currently, is the software as a service model of Business Central, which is basically Microsoft's Business Central fully in the cloud, which we can only go to through the Business Central application or the browser. But for each one of these target platforms, we can only use specific transition models. For example, for the on-premise version of Business Central, we can use the extension, the hybrid, and the modified base app models because we are able to uninstall and install a base app solution on our on-premise version of Business Central due to the fact that we control the infrastructure. The target platforms, for example, the Saas version of Business Central, we can only have the extension model due to the fact that on the Saas version of Business Central, we are not controlling the infrastructure. We cannot connect directly to the server that Business Central is installed on. That means we are only able to publish a separate extension in the extension model, not a hybrid or a modified base app. So for example, if you know that you need to create a full, you need to go to the Saas, you know that you need to take and move your solution fully to extensions. So yeah, let's say that I have decided to use the hybrid model for my bicycle company solution. So one of the questions might be, what do I need to do to move my solution to extensions? And this is probably the most interesting question and probably requires the most amount of explaining to do. So yeah, these are all the steps that need to be taken when moving a solution from CL to AL. And this is only a 1 hour long webinar, so we are not going to be able to look through each and one of these issues. But if you would like to go and see all the limitations with the long descriptions and the suggested resolutions, the limitations can be found on our One-Click Factory website. And if you would like to download them, you can go to the One-Click Factory page, click on Upgrade, then click on the CL to Extension Analyzer. And then at the bottom of the page, we have the limitations to transition from CL to extension identified PDF that you can download. And it's going to have all of the limitations and with the correct resolutions. But we're still going to look at some of them in this webinar, maybe, but not all of them. And we're going to go through them in specific steps. So at One Click Factory, we have identified specific steps that need to be taken when moving a solution from CAL to AL. And we do these steps for every project that we do when moving a CAL to AL. And let's look at them a bit more in depth. And let's talk, what do we do in one specific transition step? And everything starts still on the CAL side of the solution, and we call this step cleanup. So in the cleanup step, we remove any unused variables, functions, or objects still on the CAL solution. Why do we do this? So we do this because if we remove all the unused stuff from a CAL solution, we're gonna need to re-implement a lot less stuff directly on AL. That means that we minimize the amount of hours needed to move a solution from CAL to AL just by doing a cleanup. And one of the cool things of this step is that we do this still on CAL. We identify any unused variables, functions, or objects, and then we remove them from the CAL solution. So this, for example, if you're interested in how many objects or variables are unused on that specific bicycle company that I have mentioned before, I have added some statistics. So there are about 500 unused variables, 10 obsolete properties, about 100 unused objects, and 133 unused functions in the current solution that we have moved on Business Central. After we remove the variables, objects, and procedures, we're going to have a lot less modifications that need to be re-implemented on the AL side. So let's say that we have done the cleanup on the bicycle company. The next step is to look what do we need to do next. So the next part is transforming our CAL solution to AL. And this is done in 4 parts. So first off, we export the standard and custom objects to the new syntax of Business Central. We're going to look at what this new specific syntax is in a couple of minutes, but bear with me here. So then when we take these 2 standard and custom solutions, we take a look at them and we want to see what modifications have been added to the solution. So we basically get the deltas between the custom and standard solutions. And then we take those deltas and run through a Microsoft provided tool called Text to AL. And then we have the fully transformed solution. So let's take a look at it quite more in depth. So we take a standard solution of Business Central, basically only the base application of Business Central in that current version that our Business Central is on. And we use the export NAV application object command with the parameter called export to new syntax. And then we're going to have our standard objects in the new syntax. We do the same with our custom objects with the standard. We do the same with the standard objects with our modifications. We basically take the full solution, run the same command, and we're going to have the same objects in the new syntax of Business Central. And if you have any questions of what does the new export to new syntax does, basically this is what it does. It takes the old syntax of Business Central, basically the old date format. It takes the identification of the tables. It takes code unit IDs, and then it transforms them into a different date format. It changes the IDs to the names. It changes the yeses to the trues, and it does some syntax modifications on our Business Central object. For example, all of the flow changing statements in the bottom have been decapsulized and they are no longer in caps. So basically it fixes up a bit the solution so it would be easier to move the solution to AL. If you're interested, if for example, one of the questions might be, can I import this type of solution after I transform it to the new syntax to AL? And the answer is no, you're not able to. You would get an error with specific details, but you should not try importing the solution directly back to CAL when you have transformed it already. So when you have the custom and standard solutions already transformed, the next step is to transform those differences into extension. So let's take this our custom solution with the standard objects. Let's compare it with the standard solution, and let's get the deltas between these two solutions are basically the differences that our partner or I or maybe our customer has made directly on those objects. Then after we have the deltas, let's take the deltas and run through a Microsoft provided tool called text to AL, and let's create. And what does this text to AL tool does? It basically takes the differences and creates AL objects automatically, and I do not need to do that later in or by my hands. But one of the key things that you may notice that in the deltas and the AL objects, the images are different, which means that not all modifications are automatically moved when we are using the text to AL tool. If any conflicts are identified in the deltas, we are not able to move those modifications automatically. We need to do them. We need to move them by hand later in the life cycle. Later when moving to extensions. Okay, so when I have moved my solution to AL, the next thing is I need to think about the code that is in the base application that has been left in the base application. Basically, the conflicts that need to be fixed. And we call this step move to events. So basically, we take as much code as much modifications as possible, and we move these modifications to specific standard publishers on AL. So we take the any type of code, and then we attach it to specific publishers. The bad thing about this part is that there are specific limitations when moving code from to the publisher model. For example, let's say that the customer or the partner or maybe the developers have added additional parameters to the functions. If they have added additional parameters to the functions, you are not going to be able to easily move that solution to a publisher because it is not possible to do that currently. The next thing is some statements behave differently on the extension model or on the publisher model. For example, if I have any type of exit statements, they're going to work differently on the subscribers than they're going to work directly on the base code. So in this step, we move as many modifications as possible to the publishers and we leave the base objects intact. But then after we do that, we need to think about the base app modifications that we're going to leave in the solution. So the base app modifications is a step in which we take a look at the code which has been left after we move as much code to events, and we take a look at it and we think about how and what can we do with the code that has been left and how much code do we leave in that solution. So these are specifically the limitations that occur when we want to leave when we need to leave some code in the base application. For example, if there are changes in the standard code, for example, any comments or flow changing statements like if cases and etc., we're not going to be able to move that type of code into AL. For example, if no publishers are available next to the modifications, we are not going to move it to events. Then, for example, if any breaking changes are on any types of objects, we are not going to be able to move those types of breaking changes to the object, to the events. For example, if I have removed or maybe changed the length of a field in the base application, I'm not going to be able to create an extension or create any event that does the same specific stuff directly on the event model or the extensions. I need to think about how can I re-implement this type of modification and how do I make it work correctly when I have re-implemented that type of modifications. So let's take a look at a couple of examples on that specific company that I mentioned before. So in this modification, we can see with the tags, the 1CF tags, the customer has added a couple of modifications that change the flow of the current code. For example, we can see that they have added an if statement which is basically if it doesn't go through, it doesn't run the code after standard code, which is after that specific code block. So that means that when talking about the specific transition models with the hybrid model, when we are able to modify the base application, it's quite easy to leave this change intact. But if you would want to have a fully blown out extension, the implementation can take 2, 3, 4, or 5 hours to implement, because we need to rethink the architecture of the application and we need to rethink how do we duplicate this type of change on extensions, not on the base application. The other type of quite oftenly seen code is code comments. For example, basically removal of standard code that should be ran. And in this specific one, if the field number, if the field which is ran is the promised delivery date, it is no longer to run specific validations because the customer doesn't want to run them. And this type of change is not easily re-implemented in extensions, but on the hybrid model of Business Central, we can leave this type of change intact and then maybe move this change later in the life cycle, for example, after the release of a newer version of Business Central and etc. So let's say that I have transformed my solution to AL. I have moved as much code as possible to events and publishers, but I have also left some code in the base application. If I have been using an application which still did not have the web client, or maybe I have not been using, or my customer has not yet been using the web client, the next step at One Click Factory, what we do is we do a step called web client reimplementation. And what do we do here is we reimplement the functionality which is not possible on the web client, because the web client still has a number of limitations straight on it. For example, any type of file upload or file manipulation or server resource manipulation functions will not work when running at the application from the web client, or any .NET that is client-based is not going to work on the web client directly and is going to be needed to be re-implemented on the web if the customer wants to use the web client. And if the customer wants to move to the 150 or 160 version of Business Central, it is not possible to not do the steps, because on the 150 and 160 version of Business Central, we have no other choice but to use the web client of Business Central. So let's say that I have done the web client implementation and now most of my code works quite correctly. That means that I have my solution almost ready. But I need to think about the data which is in the solution. And I need to think about what do I need to do to move my data from my current CEL solution to AL. And we call this step the data migration step. So since the storage model on CEL and extensions is quite different, because on CEL we have the changes directly on SQL, on the tables and etc. But on extensions, we have a separate copies of those tables with the specific fields. We need to do a data migration to move our data to extensions. So we call this step the data migration. The data migration step is quite thoroughly described in the Microsoft documentation. And if you would go to the Microsoft website or the Microsoft Docs, it goes through quite in depth of how do we do the data migration, because we do the exact same steps. So let's say that I have done the data migration. So let's say that if my customer is going to be using an on-premise solution, basically I'm done. I have my solution ready. I have moved my solution to AL. I have moved my data from the CL model to AL, and my customer has tested out this functionality on the web client, and they said, okay, it's perfect. I think we are ready to move to the new solution. And if we're talking about the on-premise version of Business Central, basically we're done. But what if I would want to move to the Saas target model of Business Central? There are a couple of additional steps that need to be done when moving to the Saas when comparing it to the on-premise version of Business Central. And one of them is if I want to move the Saas, I need to eliminate any base app modifications that have been done. So basically, I need to only have all of my modifications on extensions. Then I need to eliminate any external .NET usages that are my solution. Maybe I should re-implement them through Azure functions or some different web services. Then I need to eliminate any type of file usage or server resource usages from my solution. And if I'm an ISV and I want to publish my solution on AppSource, I need to look through my solution and to make sure that my solution complies with the AppSource requirements. But if I want to only have a per tenant extension, I still need to look through the per tenant extension requirements, so I would be able to have a SaaS solution ready. So basically, if I want to go to the SaaS, I need to eliminate base app modifications, .NET modifications, and server resource usages. And I need to make sure that I comply with the specific requirements that I have taught, so I would be able to publish my extension or my solution on the SaaS version of Business Central. So yeah, these are quite a lot of steps. This is about 7 steps that need to be done when moving from CL to AL. And one of the questions might be, so how do we do it in One-Click Factory? So all of these steps that we have mentioned before, especially the identification of any possible issues, we identify all of these issues through an automatic tool called CAL to Extension Analyzer. And what it basically does, it identifies a list of issues or conflicts that Dynamics partners are going to get when moving a solution from CAL to extensions. And the cool part about it is that we identify the conflicts and then we recommend a resolution for those conflicts based on One-Click Factory's best practice in a lot of extension projects currently. And the last part, probably the most interesting part, is that we look through the conflicts and we estimate a preliminary number of effort required for a company to move that solution from CAL to AL. So let's have a quick look at the CAL to Extension Analyzer, and let's take a look at what it basically does, how it looks, and how can I use them to my favor. Before we go to the demo, the cool part about this CAL to Extension Analyzer is that if you would go to the One-Click Factory website, you can ask for an overview of the CAL to AL analyzer for free if you would go to CAL to Extension Analyzer at the One-Click Factory page. And we're going to give you a PDF file with an overview of your solution. But if you would like to get what kind of issues specifically you have on the solution, you might need to look through the One-Click Factory pricing to get the full report. So let's look at the report that you get in the CAL to Extension Analyzer, and I'm just going to quickly turn off the slides. Okay, and I'm going to show you the Excel file that you get on the CAL to Extension Analyzer. So this is the CAL to Extension Analyzer result, or basically the report of the CAL to Extension Analyzer, and I'm gonna maybe enlarge it a bit so you guys would see it a bit better, or maybe not. Let's leave it as it was because it's quite visible already. So this is the CL to extension analyzer, and the first page is probably not the most interesting one, so let's jump to the second one. The second page is basically all the objects that we have identified, and basically this page shows what objects did we go through when we were identifying the conflicts between the solutions. So let's say that I want to look at what objects did my customer or I changed on the full solution. I can just filter out the changed objects, and I'm going to see all the objects that have been changed on my solution. The next part is the findings and advice. So in the findings and advice page of Business Central, and I think I have already filtered or some parts, I'm just going to select all, are all the changes or all the conflicts that we at OneClick Factory identify when moving a solution from CEL. So for example, if we take a look at any of these solutions, for example, let's just filter this out through a specific transition step that we have talked about before. So let's take a look at the cleanup step. And at the cleanup step, we're going to see all of the unused stuff on my customers or my solution. So basically on the seventh table of Business Central, we can see that there are at least 5 custom unused variables that can be removed without any further ado. And this is how we identify or basically clean up the specific solution and etc. So the cool part is that we identify the limitation, we suggest a specific resolution, we identify the place where it is, so basically on the lead trigger, and we identify the needed minutes to re-implement this type of functionality. So basically I would need at least almost 1 minute to remove this type of variable. If we then let's go to the other page, which is called a summary, and in the summary we have basically a preliminary estimate of the hours needed to move a solution from CAL to AL. So we have the straightforward implementation hours, how many hours totally are needed, and etc. The cool part about this is that we identify all of the conflicts based on the transition steps. So we can see that there are at least 271 issues that in the cleanup that need to be fixed. There are 182 modifications that need to be moved to events. There are specific issues in the migration and etc. But one thing we can notice is that on the page, on the bottom left of the page, there is a get ready for Saas section. And this section might not always be needed. So because maybe I just want to move my solution to the on-premise version of Business Central, I don't need to get ready for the Saas version of Business Central. So the cool part about this report is that everything here calculates automatically. So if I would just go to back to the findings and advices, and I would filter out the Saas compatibility issues, and then I would delete these issues, and I'm just going to quickly delete them. The number of hours needed is going to automatically update. So that means that every modification, or maybe some advices or some conflicts you don't need to look through, everything is going to be recalculated, and the estimate is going to be recalculated as well. So this is the CAL to extension report. So basically we identify the objects, the conflicts, and we give you a preliminary number of hours that are needed to move a solution from CAL to AL. So I'm going to jump back to my presentation, and let's have a Q&A session. So if you have any questions, feel free to open up your microphone or write down in the messages, and I'm going to answer any questions that you have about moving a solution from CAL to AL, or maybe have other questions about the CAL to extension analyzer. So let's take a couple of minutes and let's have a Q&A session.
Hi there. One question, if I may. Looking at the information you're showing, you seem to be highlighting that from conventional upgrade to extensions, it's a 4-to-1 ratio.
It's not a 4-to-1 ratio. I asked the same question our developers last week, but it's not a 4-to-1 ratio because every type of solution is different, and some changes may need a lot more implementation that they would be needed on the base app. For example, one of the most hours that are needed on when talking about extensions is .NET implementation. So for example, if I want to move to extensions and I want to move to the Saas version of Business Central, that number may go up at least 5, 6, 7, or 8 times, and it's not a direct correlation with 4 times.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a really good question. If you guys have any other questions, we still have a lot of time left, so I'm gonna answer everything that you asked. So, okay, I can see that probably there are no questions, but if you'll have any questions, maybe after the meeting that may occur to you after maybe you rewatch the webinar, if you would like to, you can easily write down a reply to this meeting, and we are going to be able to see, or maybe even in the comments in this meeting, and I will be maybe able to answer the questions after the meeting if any of them occur. So thank you guys for your time. I hope the webinar was quite insightful and quite interesting for you guys. And I hope you will enjoy the rest of the QBS Academy stuff that they're organizing currently. And I wish you all to have a good week. And we're almost at the weekend, so thank you for joining me. Goodbye.
Thank you, Matas.
Thanks.